So, everybody, welcome to the next episode of The Growth Show. Delighted to be here, as always. Some fascinating conversations we've had so far. I'm Ollie Phillips, and I'm very, very lucky to be joined today by David Berkeley and Tom Pickering. Tom, to give you some background on him, Tom is an experienced business leader who has helped over 200 businesses with serious challenges, rapidly reducing their sort of uncertainty and reaching resolution with them. His methodology that he uses to do that, which I'm sure he's going to elaborate as we go through, is through his company. He's the chief executive of a company called Winning Thinking, and they have a methodology called the Team Game Changer model. So I'm looking forward to understanding how that one plays into action later on. David is in similar field, but he runs a coaching company called Elevate Founders that predominantly focuses on coaching founders and senior teams and startups and scale-ups, looking at areas such as emotional intelligence and leadership development. So two incredibly well-schooled individuals with us today on the podcast. Delighted that this is happening, and we've chosen a pretty broad subject today, gents. I believe, and that we're going to look at the general mistakes that leaders make in a crisis, fairly relevant and pertinent to what is going on today. Some may be in one camp, some in another. Some may think that some of our leaders around the world are doing a sterling job. Others may think they're doing a disastrous job, but we're going to look at the common mistakes they make and equally how they can correct them at the end. So thank you ever so much for being here, Tom, David. Great to have you both on board.
Pleasure to be here.
Tom, let's start with you, my man. Let's start with your opinion. It's a broad subject, so we could be here for hours. We're going to try and keep it as punchy as possible, but given the backdrop of COVID-19 that we've got right now, leadership's obviously incredibly important. From your experience of having dealt with over 200 businesses, what are these common mistakes that leaders fall into in times of crisis? Yeah,
good question, Ollie. I think the main pitfall is leaders thinking they know better, and the way that manifests itself. And there's two things I'd like to discuss. One is the impact on the staff, and then secondly, I'd like to talk a bit about strength and vulnerability. So, in terms of the first point, I think there's a temptation when things get difficult to assume the world's on your shoulders and you need to know the answers to all the questions. When in fact, completely the opposite is true. The key is actually to acknowledge the individuals and really take an interest in them, to really care about the individuals and start putting other people first.
Well, Tom, let me try and dive in on something about this then, because what I'm intrigued about is let's contextualize what's going on at this present moment in time. You've got leaders all around the country that perhaps have got pressure. Let's name names. Whether it be Boris Johnson or Donald Trump or whatever. They're in a position whereby they are expected to know the answers.
Yeah.
They are expected to know the answers, make decisions upon a crisis that is going on in front of us. Yeah, is that okay? Is that expectation fair and valid, or is that because equally they behave as if they know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognise there are a lot more people than yourself when you're in a leadership position, and the world is not on your shoulders, and we're only as good as the people around us. And so on that basis, we're effectively orchestrators, but the key glue to hold the thing together is actually caring about other people and listening to what they've got to say. And particularly when we're a little bit isolated,
sorry to interject, Tom, but how do you show that? Like, when you're the Prime Minister, President, Chief Executive of a massive company, thousands of people at your disposal, how do you show that you care and love them?
Well, I think it's an internal thing. You either do, you don't. It's got you've got to take an interest. I mean, what we do is actually to practice putting somebody else first. So I think the first thing is in terms of the way this manifests itself, is to start putting other people first. And what happens then is they put you first, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what that does is it creates a free and open situation whereby people know exactly what's going on. The in terms of the good and the bad as well, the best way to get good performance and good behaviour is not by setting values and standards. It's actually to let people do their own thing, oddly enough, and actually take an interest in them. Because when you give people opportunities and let them do their job, they tend to behave themselves and deliver great results.
Okay, so I mean, empowering people, putting them first, showing that you care. I mean, David, that all seems to resonate with a level of having a decent level of emotional intelligence, something that you're well schooled in. Whether we are contextualizing it into the current situation with our existing government or whatever else, or just in general within this time of crisis, within lots of different organisations that will all be facing their own challenges. How does that really come to the fore? Is that something that you can just suddenly pull out your left pocket, top pocket of I'm going to be this incredibly emotionally intelligent leader that engages and cares about everyone? It feels like that's going to be a bit contrived. But how, from your experience, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing, because for a lot of the time under pressure, people perform in behavioural patterns. We fall back to what we know. So a lot of leaders are going to be under a lot of pressure now, from Boris Johnson to a small business leader to big corporates, startups. Everybody's going to be under pressure. There's going to be clients not paying, or people disobeying the lockdown measures. We'll leave that for another time, perhaps.
Well, David, can I ask about that? So, to Tom's point of you need to show people that you've got empathy, that you care about them, and therefore they will love and respect you in result and do what you're asking them to do. Is the fact that people aren't doing that at this present moment in time an example that, I don't know, it's not being shown, or they don't believe the message?
I think it reveals, under pressure, it reveals our character. So, let's put it in your sort of rugby playing context, Ollie. When things are going well, you're sort of 4 tries out, you're cruising the last couple of minutes of the game, passes sort of go to hand, and everything's working quite well. When you're in a final of a game, and you're a couple of tries down, and you're getting, some absolutely massive Fijians or Samoans, chasing you down, and things aren't working, it's not clicking, it's not flowing.
You see me running away. You see me running to the change room at that point. Stop, get me off.
Yeah, exactly. The hammy's gone.
Yeah, sniper.
Exactly. You can often see leaders trying to do more. They try and step in and take control of things more. They try and be the person that makes the break, that makes the key pass. And in business, you see that, as Tom was saying earlier, of jumping in, of I know better. I can do this. I can get from A to B quicker than you can. So if I just do this for you, then it'll help everybody, because we'll get things faster. That then disempowers the employees. Then they sort of start waiting for the leader to do stuff, which creates this loop. And I love behavioural loops are brilliant. I love that, because it shows you can break the loop. Because you can understand what's happening, you can then change the behaviour.
Okay.
And so in that situation, the best thing leaders can do is just take time out. Take a breather. Probably on the rugby field, you might have had 5 seconds breather just to sort of pause and think and reset. In business, maybe just take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour each day, and sit back and go, right, what do my team need from me? What is it that they want? How can I best help them today to get to their outcomes, as opposed to me jumping in and fixing stuff?
Yeah. Okay. And do you think, on your point, because both of you sort of said that a common mistake is that people think they've just got to jump in and do more, whereas actually they probably need to pause and do less in that scenario, or not necessarily do less, but at least take time for reflection and thought process. Do you think there's obviously an expectancy or thought process from leaders that they have to do that, but equally on the flip side, employees, British public, press and media, whatever it might be, expect you to do that too? Like there is a pressure for you to act and respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Tom will probably have some great examples of this too. I think under pressure, particularly the British public, we expect our leaders to step up, and we put pressure on them to lead from the front. When Boris was in hospital, everyone was saying, "When's Boris going to be back? We need him at the front. We need him doing these briefings." But actually, I think the guys who did the briefings, in his absence, did a really, really good job. I think they steadied the ship and gave a really clear message. And actually, I often think the countercultural, counterintuitive answer is often the right one. So actually, I think leaders doing less, but what they do is better quality, is usually the way forward. If they can facilitate everyone else shining and doing what they need to do, then as a leader, you're in a good position, I think.
Yeah. And Tom, just on that, I mean, obviously you've seen lots and lots of companies dealt with lots of different, I guess, personality traits over time from different industries, different sectors, and things like that. Is there a constant theme, current theme? We've mentioned the fact that there's this tendency to dive in. When you've gone into some practices, how much does ego play a role in, I guess, either making a leader either make bad decisions or good decisions? Like, how much does that play a role in this broad perspective of, like, I have to do something because I'm the chief exec, or I'm the prime minister, or I'm the managing director?
Yeah, well, I think if you think about it, Ollie, the whole education system is geared up for leaders to know the answers to the questions, which is fairly ridiculous. And I think the challenge is, in a difficult situation, is how do we respond? So, and it's very difficult to know how people respond in difficult situations until they're actually faced with it. And I think we've had a period where things have been very easy for a very long period of time. So would you, Tom, would you argue that people are not, I guess, well practiced or well versed at the moment to deal with crisis? Totally. Well, they don't even recognise it. Yeah. So, I mean, the first response that Boris Johnson made was, rather than really get into the facts on the crisis, he made a statement that it was just a generalisation, which normalises a situation which creates stasis, and that statement was the big bounce back. Okay, now that's an example of somebody expecting things to go back to the way they were, as well as fueling, supporting house prices and other things which frankly are unsustainable. So what you find is that people tend to do what they've done in the past, regardless of whether or not they're right or wrong. And when people become stressed, they will repeat more and more things they've done in the past, and they'll stop thinking. And the challenge with this is to actually recognise junctures in communication when people should say stop. That is challenging, and those are generalisations. So if anybody makes a statement like the big bounce back, or when we come through this, alarm bells should ring. In fact, David made a statement the other day around as well when we were talking, which actually creates stasis, and these statements are really critical. So and we're not aware of this. So when we're reading this situation, Ollie, this is my concern, that leaders are unaware. Also, this is very unfamiliar territory. When things get seriously difficult, it's very difficult to know how people behave. So we have, how do we handle that in a crisis? We have a structure that we put in place, which I effectively orchestrate with my team, because some people can't cope with this. Okay, and you need to be able to recognise when people can't cope, and you drag them out, and/or you support them, and you know how to handle that. So it's a whole different set of skills to cope with this.
And what are the common signs of when people can't cope? Out of interest, like how do you know when they've just lost the plot? I mean, apart from the obvious that they're running around and crying or something like that, but let's get to that level.
Well, it's generalisation. So what we do, Ollie, for example, when David posed this question, there was various different. We either ignore it completely, which is delete something. So you can label something and say, well, Ollie's toxic, I'm not going to speak to him if he says something I don't like. So first of all, the communication comes up through the ranks. That gets pushed to one side, and you just disregard it completely. That's called deletion. You can distort something, which is you can create a generalization. You can say, well, everybody's got a pension scheme, or everybody's got a mortgage extension, therefore that's okay. So that's a distortion. And if you look at all of the actions that have been taking place through this process, you can also identify that they're the same actions despite the circumstances have changed. So the whole situation around propping up the economy, propping up house prices, they're all what's happened before. There's very little and that's a sign of no thinking going on, Ollie. So this is a catch-22 trap. And of course, if you don't address the right issue, you end up creating rework. So some of the rework currently is quite subtle actually, but it's things like fudging the insolvency legislation. So there's a whole raft of technicalities that are taking place there around creating a window of letting directors off for trading to the detriment of creditors. That's one thing. The extending the furlough scheme, the logic around that in terms of the words really matter. So in my view, that should be a window, a grant, to a restructuring grant rather than a loan, because this is a one-off hit, and that would then encourage people to say, right, I need to use this time, but by creating a loan, you're creating effectively creating an addiction to government funding. And at the moment, Ollie, the level of this crisis is quite extraordinary, because effectively capitalism has fallen to pieces, utterly unique, and everybody's gone back to the state. They've gone back to the nanny state, regardless if you're left wing, right wing, whichever wing you are. There are very few people that can cope, and when people can't cope, this is the worst situation for human beings. But uncertainty is the one thing we can't cope with, and there's lots of there's some underlying drivers. So you go on an MBA program, it's all about more. This is the reason why we've been trashing the planet on quite a grand scale. And so the basic mantras underlying this are really quite critical, and people are quite unaware of this, Ollie, incredibly enough. So in an easy time, and also a lot of leaders who have been successful can get seriously derailed, because there's an effect called hubris, which because successful leaders don't actually necessarily see these patterns, because they've been sailing with a tailwind for an awful long time.
So David, there's a lot of stuff for us to sort of potentially pick up from there. Some of the things that were really interesting for me there were, I guess, the anxiety, fear piece that perhaps leaders are feeling right now, of like, I don't really know what to do, but they probably feel like they can't expose themselves to the world. I think it would obviously be I don't know how well or badly it would go down, for example, if Boris Johnson came out and said, I just don't know what to do, everyone. No. So how do you get over that hurdle? How do you get over this hurdle of, okay, look, what is the reality is not allowed to be exposed, for whatever reason, because people won't be accepting of it. And so therefore, you either have to ignore your failings and internalize them and just feel anxious and fearful, or you have to have this sense of bravado where you think you know better and you make poor decisions. Have you seen that in lots of companies before that you've dealt with, and equally, how do they manage through it, or what do you see as the ways of offering solutions to that?
It's a really good question. We could do an entire other series on basically we're talking about imposter syndrome. That kind of, as Tom's talked about it, of I should know the answer. Everyone's looking at me like I should know the answer, so I'm going to say something as though it's the answer, and hope that nobody who knows more about it than I do pulls me up on it. That is, it's toxic in any kind of leadership thing, and it slightly goes back to Tom's point of the kind of the strength and vulnerability, because we often look at leaders who are strong, who sort of take decisive action and going, right, we're all going this way, come on, and that's it, and sort of people blindly follow. People blindly following, often end up going blindly following off a cliff, because we're completely disjointed from what's actually going on. And actually, in our sort of education systems and how we operate usually in business in the West, is vulnerability is seen as a weakness. So if I say I don't know what to do, if you turn around to the guys in the team in a sevens final, guys, I've got no idea what to do against these guys.
Thankfully, David, most of them knew that anyway. They just accepted it as it was. So yeah,
I doubt that, but but actually, good leaders are often the smartest business people I know are the people who realise they don't know everything, and they're often the people who talk very little and ask a lot of questions, because they might go around the room and go, I might be an expert in my area, but there might be somebody who knows a 1% thing that I don't know about this area. So I'm going to listen and see if I can learn something from them, as opposed to assuming that I know more.
Okay.
Often the weak leaders are the ones who talk more. And if the more you listen to them talking, the more you realise they don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
And so part of it, and again, Tom touched on it earlier, is just actually taking time to listen to people. And I think a lot of speaking to the point about stress in a business, a lot of the business owners I know, I mean, what is it? 49% of business owners will have some sort of mental health problem, or, CEOs. I mean, it's a crazy statistic. I mean, if you were, to go into something and you said you've got a 50% chance of getting a serious mental illness from doing this, you sure you want to do it? Most people might think about it before they jumped into that position. But a lot of it, I think, comes down to they've got a very small group of people they can really be open and vulnerable to. And a lot of the clients that I have, probably the biggest thing they appreciate is that I'm a disconnected sounding board for them. I'm someone they can actually just unload problems to and just bounce these things off. Now, you didn't want to build that into your culture of your team and how you do that across. But that's one of the big things, that people don't actually have the resources around, or they don't perceive that they have the resources around them to sort of go and find the information they need and to be able to talk to people.
And is that so where does the responsibility lie for that then, ultimately? Is that their failing as a leader to, I guess, create that environment of sharing and being able to be vulnerable, or is that a failing of the system in general? I know that's a fairly broad question, but I'm just wondering how you overcome that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's both. I mean, I think there's more we can do to educate kids to be more vulnerable, is I think we're doing, and it's okay not to be okay, and that's fantastic for people to actually talk about some of the stresses they're under on that kind of mental health side. I think on an individual level, a lot of you just need to be really aware of your strengths and weaknesses and your blind spots. And sometimes a real strength can also be a real blind spot.
Okay.
And so I think that's where it's really important to have people around that you can really trust, who will pull you up and say, "What are you doing? This isn't the right thing." And also to have the culture in the business to be able to do that. That's a sign of a really good culture, when people can healthily challenge an idea and a concept to get to a better outcome.
Okay.
Very good.
So picking up on your strengths and weaknesses piece, and Tom, coming back to you on your last comment about hubris. Now, how do you make sure, I guess, that you keep in check with your strengths and weaknesses when, as you say, all the tailwinds have been behind you, you've been flying, everything you touch turns to gold, maybe you become egotistical, a bit arrogant, maybe a bit nonchalant. Like, how do you sense check that? And what characteristics, personality traits, or whatever, do you see as the best leaders in the world that they have in order to do that sense checking, to make sure they stay on track and stay honest and true to their strengths and weaknesses and to their values?
Well, I think that the starting point with this, Ollie, which is what COVID-19's highlighted, is how little we actually know. Okay, so fundamentally, we know when the wind's behind you, everything's fine. I've had the privilege of being in 200 organisations, directly or indirectly, that have hit something they can't cope with. And the natural response as a leader is to go in and tell people what to do, which frankly is what most turnaround people do. But it's a big mistake. What you need to do is decide what good looks like and set a framework up, and then you subdivide things into chunks, and then you give things to people to do. But you need to make sure that in that process that they can actually do that. And they tend to, first of all, they tend to be the least likely people. And the second thing is then you set up a review to develop the team. So unlike David, I actually I'm very much hands-on. I'm operationally accountable, so I'm all about getting businesses back onto track. But people will often come to me when I'm running these reviews and just say, "Look, Tom, tell me what to do," and I'll say no. And there's various different ways of engaging, because if I tell people what to do, the button just switches off, and they go back to not thinking. And and if you're not thinking, Ollie, when you're going from A to B, your capability isn't developed. You just get tired. And you just come back to Tom and say, "What do you think now, Tom?" Myself, and for a start, it bores me stupid. And actually, sometimes another way of handling this is also to act stupid. It sounds very counterintuitive, but I often act stupid because that really cranks up the the level of urgency with the team.
I'm incredible at doing that, Tom. So I mean, maybe I should come work for you because I'm phenomenally stupid. I mean,
yeah. But I think
one of my great. You know how David said, "Know your strengths and weaknesses." I know that I am incredibly stupid. So that's clearly a strength right now in our conversation, which is excellent.
That's a good place to be, because I think that's actually pretty close to reality, to be honest, Ollie. Although, and I don't like this label of that we talked about before. I don't like labels particularly at all, but I think it's the best place to be in a boardroom. Rather like when you were concerned when you first joined PwC, you were concerned that you didn't know things. That's actually the best place to be, because that's closest to reality of anybody in that room. Because the fact is that knowing or expecting that you know better is a flawed position. The only way you can really take a view of what's going on is to open up the communication with the team, make sure you're approachable, and get absolutely pure, uncut information the best you can, and then you can start putting the jigsaw together, which requires more than one person. And if you interrupt that pattern, or if you stop people from thinking by telling them what to do, it's like flicking a switch and you just switch people off. And in a situation when things get difficult, you must have people that are thinking, and they also must make decisions as well. So, and this whole thing sounds pretty straightforward, but it's utterly unique, Ollie, because in terms of, I will push back. People say, "What do you think, Tom?" I said, "Look, I'm not going to tell you. I know how to engage. I might clarify something. They might have misunderstood something, or they might need some technical advice." So I'm not awkward for the sake of it, but I let them think it through. And what I find as well is when I interject, actually, I don't know the detail. So they know their jobs much better. It sounds like a bit of a truism, but when I do, I notice I get it wrong. And so I think the acid test in terms of capability with all of that is the best leaders. One, they put the hand up and say they don't know, because that's a great sign. And all of the projects, the most successful projects we've ever done, that's the characteristic. The second thing is they're willing to hand stuff off to me. So they say, "Look, Tom, I don't know what to do. I just want you to sort this out." That's another very healthy sign. There's one third check, which checks values. I don't like putting people into boxes, but actually, are you in agreement in terms of the outcome? So some leaders, and I have been told, go and fire some people, which actually isn't a very constructive thing, necessarily. But, so sometimes you can be misaligned on the outcome, which tests your values. So they might say, well, it might just be a completely financial, shop out the customer service department, which you fundamentally disagree with. And I quite often walk away from situations like that if I really, and this is where, when things get difficult, Ollie, how do people behave? Because I quite often say, look, if I'm involved in a situation that's not going to work, I'll say, look, I get the point, but if you won't let me do the job, I'm not, I'm not going to do this. And a lot of people will fudge it. They'll take a high day rate to deliver mediocre outcomes. That's when push comes to shove. When things get tough, are you willing to sail it right into the wind? And that's very unfamiliar territory for a lot of people.
But how do you? So one thing I just wanted to pick up on was you mentioned, having an acceptance and a recognition that you don't know the answer, and being willing to maybe offer it to somebody else that does, or you think that does have the answer. How do you overcome that sort of insecurity? I don't know what the word is, of really having no checks and balances against that individual. If you don't know the answer and you're watching Tom go off and do his thing, and you don't actually know what good looks like because you've got no idea, how do you ultimately get comfortable and sure in the fact that they are doing the right job? Because
there's absolute accountability. So you've added some meaning to that, which I have complete accountability. So I'll say to you, Ollie, look, Ollie, I want you to, I'll give you an example, to double the output of the factory. Right, this is real, okay, in 2 weeks, and you've got X amount of money, and if you get stuck with that task, you let me know. And that's your role as part of the member of the team. And I say to the finance person or the procurement person, you've got 25 grand to spend on materials, no more. I say to the finance person, you need to deal with the HMRC to come up with a time to pay arrangement, and whatever. So these are the top line objectives. The how, so that's the what. It's that then the how is down to them, and that's where the opportunity is. And then you watch how the team interacts. There's absolute accountability, Ollie. So complete and utter. And I will review this on a daily basis to make sure that two things: make sure nothing's falling through gaps. So there are gaps in these things. So someone might say something new that's cropped out the woodwork, which I haven't picked up, which I'll then make sure that there's a home, and I'll make sure that it doesn't come back to me. There's a home for all of these things. So we're developing the team. We're also, there's a reporting format I use, which is progress, issues, actions, and items for decision. And what that does is progress is really important, because it says, look, it's not me doing all the work. So if you're doing some work for me, Ollie, I know what you're doing, which is positive, and everybody else knows what they're doing. What are the issues? This is what I'm struggling with. So these are opportunities for the rest of the team to support you, because you might be duplicating effort, in which case you can stop doing things. Items for decision, which are things that you might say, this is what I've decided to do, Tom. And so that's not a juncture to provide advice rather than take away accountability. So there's absolute accountability, Ollie, with this. So the odd thing is, in terms of managing risk, the way to manage risk is to delegate, and in that type of structure, which is relatively informal but very closely tracked.
Okay.
But the
so David, I mean, listening to Tom there, some of the things that he's mentioned, we mentioned so far, has been number one, mistake leaders that make in general in times of a crisis. They try and take everything onto their own shoulders. Number one, rather than accepting and recognizing that they don't know everything, which then probably plays in the second part, which Tom sort of touched on, which is trust in other people around you that they can deliver. So having the confidence to trust in those people, empower those people to deliver, and then creating a framework or a structure of accountability, which is ultimately, I guess, listening there, your job as a leader, in inverted commas, of the organisation to do, so that people can go off and excel with their strengths, but within a guided framework, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that, David, it resonates similar to the things that you've seen before, or there's anything else that you think is actually really pressing that we haven't spoken around. But I'd just love to get your take on that, if you like, as a methodology.
Yeah, I think those would be the underpinning things in this, because under pressure, people usually leave process at the door. They think they need to reinvent a wheel. They think they need to do something completely different. Actually, they just need to be really clear on what they're trying to do. And I think a lot of the time, so I had a client, a startup company going on at the moment. This hit. Obviously, the sales guys can't do any meetings, face-to-face meetings. So how do they do meetings? How do you get corporates to spend money again when nobody's spending money? So all their projections went down massively. The head of sales of the company then completely reworked how they were going to do the sales, engaged the team, and then started hitting their targets by 300% within weeks, which is amazing. But again, it comes down to the basic principles, the basic processes were there. It was just taking the time to go, okay, well, what's different now? What's the same? What's different? And how are we going to adapt to the situation now to still get to our outcomes and still get to what we're trying to do?
So would you say, David, then a process is, well, I guess vital, or an established process is vital in order to establish trust or maintain trust? I don't know, whichever way you want to look at it, but.
Yeah, I think it's two things, isn't it? So it's, they often say, in your world of sport, if you've got a technique, you can trust the technique, which is why repetition comes in. And you look at the guys like Johnny Wilkinson kicking a ball, or Tiger Woods swinging a golf club. They just do it thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And that brings it in. The things like that's really, really important to have process. And particularly in leadership, you can't have a team where everybody's just doing what they want to do and doing different things. You can't just have everybody focus on the stuff that they enjoy doing and not doing the stuff that needs to be done. And so
how does that, David? How does that work though? Just on that, in terms of establishing a process and a method and whatever else like that. But to coin the old Mike Tyson analogy, it's great. You can have all the best processes in the planet, and you can be know how to throw the perfect punch until someone punches you straight in the nose, and then all bets are off. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's brilliant. I know all the technique, I know all the process, then I get punched in the face, and then I'm like, oh my God, I didn't like that.
Yeah, I did a charity boxing fight a few years ago, and I know exactly
Hopefully not with Mike Tyson.
No, but I did spar with someone who fought him. But we'll leave that.
My God, you're bloody good then. But
no,
anyway,
not really. We'll leave that. That is a good story, but we'll leave it for another time. Let's be clear. At the moment in this process, everybody's been punched in the face by Mike Tyson. I believe. In terms of economy and everything else, this is serious. And whatever people thought would just work before, it probably won't. And I think people need to be going back to the fundamentals of actually what they're trying to do with their business, and just get really laser focused on that and what you're trying to achieve. Now with the permutations and the restrictions that there are now, lots of people will go down into that phase of, okay, well, it's really hard to do sales now, so let's just not do sale. Let's build our pipeline for 3 or 4 months' time. As Tom was saying earlier, it's a negative statement that holds people in a certain place. Actually, you could go, well, look, there's a whole load of people who've got a whole load more time because everyone can jump on Zoom now, and you can't really because
they can't go anywhere. They're there. They aren't out for meetings because
hopefully, unless they've driven to Durham. But that's the sort of you want people to feel empowered and emboldened to make decisions and be bold and push the envelope a bit. You want people to set the framework. So you don't want people to go sort of crazy and go off in all different directions. So you need to set the parameters of what you're trying to do and be clear on that. But within that, it's about empowering people to do, and then refining from there. Leadership, entrepreneur. We don't teach leadership particularly at school, or certainly didn't in my day. Leaders tended to be the better players at rugby or whatever it was, and hockey, and they tended to be the leaders or people who could do good, public speaking or whatever. And so I think a lot of it, is we're sort of learning on the job here, and people often rise to the level of incompetence. But again, we'll talk about that in another other video. But I think. It really is coming down to putting out the frameworks of what you're trying to accomplish and getting everyone on the page to do that. I think a lot of business owners think they have more skin in the game than their employees because it's or they've got more share.
Okay.
Or they've still got a job, they've still got a mortgage, they've still got a family to feed. They've got skin in the game on a human level as you do. So use that.
Okay, so I mean, to be honest, this conversation could go on for days, which is incredible, to be honest. But I'm conscious of everyone's time here, so I want to ask one final question, if you'll allow me, which is reflecting on, I guess the initial statement that was asked was, what are the general mistakes that leaders make in a crisis? We sort of identified some of those behaviours, and then we sort of said, in order to reverse that and be a successful leader, you need to be appreciative of the fact that you don't know everything. Number one mistake is thinking you know better, or that you have to have all the answers. The second one was then you need to be able to trust all the people around you to empower them to go on and deliver on their daily jobs or their skill sets, their strengths that you said, David. And then the final one, which you both have sort of spoken around, which is making sure that there is a process, a methodology in place that allows for people to flourish, but equally to maintain some form of accountability, so that whoever is sat at the top of the tree, has a way of measuring and keeping track, if you like, of that progress and of the work that they're doing. So my question in closing, the last one, and I'd love the perspectives from both of you, is given now that we've been in COVID-19 for whatever it is, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, how do you think leaders across the globe, but in particular in the UK, whether it publicly or privately with the companies that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, how do you think leaders in general are responding at the moment? Do you think we're doing a sterling job or a poor job? And if you've got any examples of good or bad, it'd be great to hear them.
Yeah, I think I have to be really careful. I mean,
I don't want you to name names, Tom. Don't worry. I don't
No,
need to sort of say, I'll tell you what, Steve is bloody awful.
Yeah, so I think just to summarise, I think what is the challenge? The challenge is if a leader thinks they know better, they don't. But when they think they know better, and if people are acting on that, then what that does is it takes the actions away from the challenge, and everybody gets very busy, and that creates a very difficult situation. And that's got to stop. So in terms of these reviews, Ollie, it's not actually a typical business review. It's all around the psychology of this. How do you break the cycle of that?
Yeah.
And the sign of someone not coping is actually generalizations. Okay. So people will make statements like when this happens, or in fact, I remember what David said before, change takes a long time. I disagree with that, because you normalize something, and actually the winning thinking program, we actually take actions there and then in the same day, because if we don't do it today, when exactly are you going to do it, Ollie?
Right.
Otherwise you just create a long shopping list. So it's all about taking action today. So out of this, I think Tom,
just a challenge on that one then. If it's about taking actions today, publicly, privately, people are making decisions and taking actions. Whether that's the government and issuing loads and loads of debt and going back to a nanny state, or whatever.
Yeah.
They're making decisions, whether they're the right or the wrong ones.
Well, this is what, in terms of the review process, what you need to pick out. So what you need to pick out is generalizations, because the generalizations will be the wrong decisions, Ollie. Okay. So the wrong decision, there was a whole raft of them which have. So the wrong statement in the first place, this is, we'll get through this, has created a raft of actions around softening the insolvency legislation and loans for businesses, both of which are inappropriate, because there's a good chance actually this could take 25% out of the economy. It looks like it has. Okay. So therefore those two things are a fudge. But what's driving that is actually identifying the statement. So in these reviews, what you need to do is pick out certain types of communication. One easy one is generalizations, although generalizations are what keep us sane when things get really tough, because it's very difficult to face everything. And actually there are things you can do and there are things you can't do. So some things, there are things you can action and there are things you can't action. But within that, in terms of the review process, you need to pick out where people are malfunctioning, and one way of identifying that is a generalization. Those are the problem statements that create dysfunctionality and create problems. So
onto your point, I mean, it still is a decision, is it not? I mean, it's still on that example you gave, like to relax insolvency rules. But you're right. It could breed more inefficiency. It could allow bad businesses to stay afloat. Probably cost more money in the long run. So I agree, that's outcome. But is it not? Under the process? So
the process should be, Ollie, right? Is that if anybody makes one of these statements, our thinking drives our actions. Okay, if that thinking is flawed, you get a flawed action. And what should happen when that statement's made? You should say stop. We need to critically think this through. Okay, and that hasn't happened because people are unaware of how how these generalizations actually drive their actions, and they carry on regardless. And
why is that not? And Tom, why? Just sorry to interrupt you, but why is that not happening? Is that because the people around them in their teams are not?
You haven't got the skills. You haven't got the skills, right. Ollie. You haven't got the skills. Okay. So even David really knows what he's doing, and he made a statement that change takes a long time. If David's the boss, that normalizes, and I've heard that 1,000 times in organisation. Change.
David, he's killing you. He's killing you. I'm going to let you. I'm going to come to you now, David. So
I'm just saying, but I'm saying that because we need to hold each other to account, Ollie. And David really knows what he's talking about. And actually, we're all flawed. So, and I also, my team hold me to account. I've I've trained my team with these skills, so they come back to me and say, "Do you realise what you've just said, Tom?" Like, So, what does good look like? You should stop mid-sentence. The difficulty with this is, Ollie, people are unaware of this, and this is quite worrying because how do you stop this trade? You have to identify these statements before these flawed decisions get made. And so in these reviews, that's what you need to look out for, and people don't look out for that. That's a big concern of mine.
Yeah. But if you, we could go on forever, but if you don't create a big picture, broad statement for people to shoot at, how do they know the route? How do they know where they're trying to get to? How do they know the destination?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It's not so much that it's wrong; it's just being aware of the implications of it, Ollie. Right.
Right.
So, and also, it's also in terms of taking action, they need to be specific. Okay, what we tend to do is we tend to create general actions, which you can't take a general action. So it's the specific type of this is what we do in the Winning Thinking program. We pick this stuff out and we train people to actually identify this stuff and action this stuff, and the actions have to be specific. Because if you come up with a general action, you can't. We very often cram up the general actions because it creates stasis. It's very comfortable for us. Or we distort or delete. So when you get familiar with this, it basically, you create junctures in a review to say, stop. Before we move forwards, let's address that. Let's get specific to make sure we're fixing the right problem. Because if you start fudging things, you don't. My view is business. You only get one of very few opportunities. And you don't have a chance to. You should avoid taking bad decisions. And if you understand the thinking, you identify that. Say, look, stop. Identify that. You become aware of that, and then you can avoid making bad decisions. You will make bad decisions, but it's about being aware of the statements. And there are some statements which are particularly bad, like a generalization like change takes a long time, because then I've heard I can't think of how many HR directors I've heard say that, and it's just not true. It's absolute nonsense.
Okay, right. A perfect segue. So, I mean, in answer to the original question of how are leaders doing in general, Tom, if I think to sort of summarise that is, they're not doing a particularly great job because they are focusing on the wrong things, generalising to making general statements, and as a result of that, fudging it as they go along, rather than actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of the specifics as to actually how do we engender and foster change immediately by doing X, Y, and Z, right? That seems to be the general. So, David, we will come to you as the final sort of enclosing statement of, okay, how are the leaders doing at this present moment in time, publicly, privately? And also some of your thoughts on what Tom said there as well. I mean, you've got an opportunity to come back here and sort of say, I agree or disagree with the generalised statements.
No, I would absolutely agree with the generalised statements. I think, like all these things, the devil's in the detail. So, Tom and I were having a wonderful chat about this a few days ago, and I made an off-the-cuff comment that absolutely rightly that Tom picked up on. But in that, it's unpacking those statements. So for a lot of the time, change, if we leave most people in their regular daily habits, they'll keep doing what they're doing. Homeostasis. Yeah. We love the normal, regular pattern of life. I like going up in the morning. I usually have the same breakfast. I let the dog out at a certain time. She gets her breakfast at the same time. That's how sort of life tends to go. And it takes something perhaps like this, or a serious thing, to change behaviour. Or often it takes some sort of interjection at some time. And at that point, change can happen very quickly if we've got the right tools around to do it.
And are people then, I guess, an answer to the question, do you think that people are responding to that challenge or that opportunity, or are they still trying to maintain habit, status quo, or get back to normal that everyone talks about?
Just to completely duck the question, I don't think there is one answer. But also, I've seen people who are, who are sort of almost rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're just doing what they're ordinarily doing with fewer staff because they furloughed them, but it's going to be okay because they're going to come back soon, and everything's just going to crack on eventually when we get through this. To use Tom's phrase of what Boris Johnson was saying, when we get through this, that's what people are doing. Then you've got others who are going, okay, right, let's completely re-engineer our business here. This is an opportunity to stop, pause, reflect, take stock, and then take action going forward. And they're going to accelerate out of this. Because, in anything in kind of sport or business or whatever, it's the most efficient businesses, the ones that survive. And I think a lot of people are now, it's that old adage of, two people are walking through a jungle, they see a lion, one of them starts running. They go, "What? You can't outrun the lion." He goes, "I don't need to outrun the lion. I just need to outrun you." I think there's lots of business owners who are going, "Well, I just need to outrun my weakest competitors," as opposed to going, "What am I actually trying to do with my business, and how do I make this business as good as it's going to be and as efficient as it's going to be," and those kind of things. So that's, I've seen a plethora of responses to it, but I think that's what I encourage business owners to use. This is a fantastic time. All business owners say they want, the biggest thing they want is more time. Well, great, you've now got it, you can't go anywhere, you're saving your 2-hour commute every day or whatever, is how are you going to use this time now to really grow in leadership, to inspire and develop and, you know, get the best out of everybody around you, and come out of it with a really good business.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to sort of summarize. I think we could, because it's going to segue nicely into what we can probably talk about on the next show. But I think listening to those final two comments, you know, the answer to probably, or the message, sorry, to some of our leaders out there at the moment is, you know, wake up, smell the roses a little bit, stop generalizing, get specific, and grab the bull by the horns, take the opportunity to do something different rather than trying to outrun your competitor. I quite like the lion analogy. So, I mean, look, we've had a fantastic conversation. We could probably go on for hours, as we said. We will, because we're going to bring many more of these discussions on the Grow Show to each other. But I just want to say huge thanks to David and to Tom for being part of this today. I look forward to delving much deeper as we progress further on. But thank you ever so much. Stay safe and make sure you don't generalize. Get specific.